Captain Maria Reynolds gritted her teeth. The Black Hawk trembling beneath her, every gust of wind a potential disaster. Her pulse steady, her eyes scanning every inch of the rooftop. The hatch directly beneath the skids, the rotors slicing the city. Air engines humming under strain. Every micro-adjustment critical, the margin for error non-existent. The crowd below frozen in awe and fear, watching the impossible unfold in real time. She began to lower the helicopter slowly, inch by inch, the skids. Approaching the metal hatch, the tail rotor compensating for sudden gusts, debris from surrounding rooftops swirling in the rotor wash. Maria micro-adjusted cyclic and pedals, every motion precise, every instinct guiding her, the Black Hawk trembling, slightly in response to the turbulent city wind. Every vibration a warning, she interpreted instantly, maintaining perfect balance above the hatch. A sudden blast of wind funneled between two tall buildings, sending a swirl of dust and loose equipment. Toward the rotors, Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose, adjusting cyclic and pedals, the Black Hawk twisting slightly, avoiding the debris by inches, the skids remaining perfectly over the hatch, every muscle in her body taut, every sense heightened. The city air unpredictable and unforgiving, each second stretching longer than thought possible. She inched closer toward the hatch, adjusting throttle collective and cyclic micro-movements so small they would be invisible to anyone but her. The rotors, vibrating violently under strain, the engines humming like a living thing, responding perfectly to her commands. The rooftop narrow, the skids inches from touching the metal. The surrounding wind threatening to push the aircraft off balance, every adjustment a potential difference between success and disaster. Suddenly, a loose cable from the crane above whipped toward the rotor blades. Maria reacted instantly, tilting forward and applying subtle pedal adjustments, the Black Hawk twisting slightly. To the side, the skids rocking but holding steady, the hatch perfectly aligned, debris bouncing harmlessly away. She exhaled slightly but did not relax, every gust still a threat, every vibration through the airframe, a reminder of the fragility of her perch. She began the final hover, adjusting cyclic and collective minute movements, keeping the helicopter perfectly balanced, the rotors slicing the turbulent air, the tail rotor compensating constantly for unpredictable gusts, the engines humming. Under maximum strain, Maria's hands steady her pulse, calm her focus. Absolute, the skids hovering just inches above the hatch, every micro-adjustment critical to prevent tipping or sliding off the rooftop edge. The wind shifted again, a sudden gust, funneled between nearby buildings, sending loose debris spiraling into the rotor wash. The Black Hawk jolted. Maria reacted instantly, micro-adjustments, cyclic, collective, and pedals keeping the aircraft stable, the skids rocking slightly, but holding. Above the hatch, she could feel the vibration through the controls, the helicopter trembling under extreme stress, every sense alert, every muscle coiled, ready to respond to the next challenge. She inched the skids downward, inch by inch, the rooftop, trembling under the rotor wash, the hatch waiting to receive the helicopter, every movement precise, every instinct guiding her, the city wind unpredictable, every gust a potential disaster. Maria micro-adjusted cyclic and pedals constantly, the Black Hawk responding perfectly, the crowd below watching in disbelief, unable to comprehend the skill required to maintain stability in such confined conditions. The rotors sliced through the air, the engines roaring, the tail rotor compensating for every unexpected shift in wind. The skids inches from the hatch, the rooftop trembling slightly, the Black Hawk trembling under the strain. Maria micro-adjusted once more, cyclic, collective, and pedals, the helicopter responding perfectly, every second stretching into eternity. The margin for error non-existent. The crowd below holding their breath, unable to predict the outcome. Suddenly, a strong gust slammed into the helicopter from an unexpected angle, the tail rotor twisting dangerously toward a vent. Maria reacted instantly, tilting cyclic and adjusting pedals. The Black Hawk rocking slightly, but holding above the hatch, the skids finally touching down perfectly. Aligned the engines, humming the rotors, slicing the air, the wind still unpredictable, the rooftop narrow, every gust still a threat, leaving everyone watching below, frozen with fear and anticipation. And as she stabilized the Black Hawk over the hatch, a shadow moved across the adjacent building, a crane swinging dangerously in the wind, threatening to collide with the rotors, leaving Maria's eyes, narrowing her hands, gripping the controls, ready for the next impossible adjustment. The crowd below, silent, holding their breath, knowing that one wrong move could undo everything she had achieved. Captain Maria Reynolds gritted her teeth, her hands steady on the controls, the Black Hawk trembling slightly beneath her every gust of wind, a potential disaster, the skids firmly on the rooftop, but the city air unpredictable. Her eyes, scanning the surrounding buildings, every antenna vent and obstacle memorized, the rotors slicing through turbulent air engines humming at maximum power, the tail rotor compensating for every sudden shift in wind. She adjusted cyclic and collective, micro movements keeping the helicopter perfectly balanced, the rooftop narrow, the margin for error non-existent, every vibration a warning, every gust a challenge. She could feel the strain of the aircraft beneath her. Every sense heightened instincts, honed over thousands of hours of flight, guiding her hands, the crowd below frozen in awe and disbelief at the impossible feat unfolding before their eyes. Maria began the process of securing the cargo on the rooftop, personnel and supplies loaded. Carefully, she checked the harnesses and restraints, every movement deliberate, the wind still unpredictable, swirling violently between buildings, debris, and loose equipment. Flying past the rotors, she micro-adjusted pedals and cyclic, keeping the Black Hawk hovering steadily above the rooftop every second. Critical. Every adjustment, a matter of life or death. A sudden gust funneled between two tall skyscrapers, sending a rush of air into the rotor wash. The Black Hawk jolted slightly. Maria reacted instantly, adjusting cyclic and pedals the tail rotor, compensating for the unexpected shift, the skids rocking but holding steady, the engines humming, the rotors slicing through air like knives. She exhaled slowly, but did not relax the challenge. Far from over, every gust still a threat, every vibration through the airframe a reminder of the fragility of her perch. She began to position the helicopter for takeoff, slowly, inch by inch, moving toward the edge of the rooftop, the rotors slicing. Turbulent air, the tail rotor compensating for shifting wind debris flying past the skids. Maria micro-adjusted cyclic and collective, every movement, precise, every instinct guiding her, the Black Hawk responding perfectly, the crowd below holding, their breath unable to comprehend the skill required to perform such a maneuver in a confined city. Space. Suddenly a crane swung unpredictably nearby, cables rattling in the wind, threatening the rotors. Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose, adjusting pedals and cyclic, the helicopter twisting slightly in midair, avoiding collision by inches, the skids hovering perfectly stable above the rooftop, the engines humming under maximum strain, the rotors vibrating violently, the wind still unpredictable. But Maria's hands steady, her focus absolute. She began the final takeoff, the skids lifting slowly off the rooftop inch by inch. The Black Hawk trembling under the strain, the rotors slicing through turbulent air, the tail rotor compensating for sudden gusts, every micro-adjustment critical, the margin for error non-existent. Maria's pulse steady, her senses heightened, every muscle coiled, ready to respond to any unexpected shift. The crowd below silent, watching the impossible come alive. The helicopter rose slowly, the rooftop falling away beneath the skids, the wind whipping violently, the rotors slicing the air engines roaring as the Black Hawk lifted steadily into open space. Maria micro-adjusted cyclic and collective, every movement. Precise, the tail rotor compensating constantly for unpredictable gusts. The city skyline rushing past the cockpit, the rooftop shrinking behind her. Every second, a test of nerve and skill, debris from surrounding rooftops flew into the rotor wash. A sudden gust slammed into the Black Hawk from the side. Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose, adjusting pedals, and cyclic. The helicopter twisting slightly, avoiding collision, the engines humming, the rotors vibrating, the aircraft perfectly balanced. Inches from tipping the city air, a relentless adversary, every second stretching longer than eternity. She climbed steadily above the rooftop, the Black Hawk rising higher, the wind still fierce, but the aircraft stable, Maria micro-adjusting cyclic. And pedals inch by inch, the rotors slicing through turbulent air, the engines roaring, the tail rotor compensating constantly. Her hands steady her focus. Absolute every instinct guiding her, the margin for error non-existent, the city sprawling below, the impossible feat complete in motion. Finally, the Black Hawk cleared the rooftop, the engines screaming, the rotors slicing the open air. The wind still buffeting the helicopter, but Maria in complete control, she leveled the aircraft, the cargo secured. The personnel safe, the rooftop shrinking rapidly behind her, the crowd below erupting in astonished cheers and applause, unable to believe what they had just witnessed, the impossible completed by skill, courage, and precision. And as she banked the Black Hawk toward open sky, the city skyline stretching endlessly before her, a shadow flickered across the rooftops, a reminder that challenges never truly end and that in the skies there would always be another imp. Captain Maria Reynolds held the controls of the Black Hawk. Steady her pulse, steady her eyes scanning every inch of the rooftop, the skids inches above the hatch, the engines humming a steady roar, the rotors slicing the city air, every gust a potential disaster, every vibration through the airframe a warning she felt in her bones. She could not afford hesitation. The city wind unpredictable, the surrounding skyscrapers channeling air currents like invisible mazes challenging her skill. She began to lower the helicopter slowly inch by inch, the skids approaching the hatch. The margin for error microscopic. She adjusted cyclic and collective minute movements, keeping the aircraft balanced, the tail rotor compensating for sudden gusts. The rotors slicing the air, sending loose debris spiraling around the rooftop, Maria's hands never leaving the controls. Every instinct honed over years of flight, guiding her every motion, the crowd below frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend the precision required to hover in such a confined space. A sudden gust funneled between two buildings, striking the tail rotor. The Black Hawk swayed dangerously. Maria countered, immediately adjusting pedals, cyclic and collective micro-adjustments that kept the aircraft from tipping over her eyes, scanning the rooftop for hazards, the hatch edge approaching closer every second, her mind calculating speed distance, wind pressure, and weight distribution. Simultaneously, she exhaled slowly, trusting the helicopter, beneath her responding perfectly. The engineers below shouted warnings, debris flying in the rotor wash, but Maria did not flinch. Her focus absolute, the rooftop narrow every movement, a potential catastrophe, every adjustment, a life-saving action. She shifted slightly to avoid a vent protruding from the roof, tilting the rotor slightly to counter a sudden puff of wind, the Black Hawk responding instantly. Each motion, a delicate balance between power and precision, the hatch now directly beneath. Her skids. She began the final descent. The skids inches from touching the metal edge, the wind swirling violently around the surrounding buildings, a vortex forming, suddenly threatening to catch the tail rotor. She leaned into the controls, adjusting, cyclic, collective, and pedals in perfect coordination. The engines humming under strain, the rotors slicing through the gusts every second, stretching into eternity. Every motion critical, the rooftop seeming impossibly small under the weight of the helicopter. Suddenly, a cable from a nearby antenna snapped loose, whipping toward the rotors. Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose slightly back, adjusting tail rotor and cyclic. The Black Hawk twisting in the air, avoiding collision, the cable bouncing. Harmlessly past the skids, she exhaled, but did not relax the challenge far from over every gust, every shift in wind still a threat. The crowd below holding their breath, unable to comprehend how any pilot could maintain such control in such a confined space. She inched the helicopter closer to the hatch. The skids nearly aligned, the engines roaring, the rotors vibrating, the wind pushing against the aircraft, threatening to tip it off balance. She micro-adjusted cyclic, collective, and pedals minute, movements so precise they would be invisible to anyone but her. The tail rotor compensating constantly for sudden gusts, the aircraft hovering perfectly stable inches above the hatch, a sudden blast of wind funneled from a nearby alley sending loose debris flying into the rotor wash. The Black Hawk jolted. Maria reacted instantly, tilting forward, adjusting pedals, and collective the skids rocking slightly over the hatch edge, but holding steady, the aircraft responding perfectly, the rooftop narrow, the city wind a constant adversary. She felt her pulse surge, adrenaline coursing through her veins, every muscle coiled ready for instant correction, every sense heightened to its maximum. She began the final touch, lowering the skids inch by inch, the rotors spinning at maximum efficiency, the Black Hawk quivering under the strain, each gust of wind threatening to tip it sideways. But she held firm, every micro-adjustment precise, every instinct guiding her, the hatch approaching so close she could feel the air currents swirling violently between the skids and the roof-edge debris flying past, threatening to knock her off balance. The engines roared, a sudden shift in the wind, sending the tail rotor toward a rooftop vent. Maria reacted, instantly adjusting cyclic and collective, the Black Hawk twisting slightly to the side, the skids rocking precariously, but she maintained perfect control, the rooftop edge inches from tipping the aircraft. She held her breath, the hatch beneath the skids waiting for her to land perfectly. She lowered just slightly, the skids touching the metal with the faintest sound, a testament to perfect precision. The crowd below erupted, not with laughter, but with astonished cheers and gasps. They could not believe what they had just witnessed. Maria allowed herself a small smile, but did not relax, her hands still steady on the controls, her eyes scanning the surrounding rooftops for wind and debris, knowing the mission was far from complete. The Black Hawk still vulnerable and the city air still unpredictable, and as she began to stabilize the helicopter on the rooftop, a sudden shadow swept across the adjacent building, a crane swinging unexpectedly in the wind, threatening to collide with the rotors, leaving everyone watching below frozen with fear and anticipation. Captain Maria Reynolds felt the Black Hawk quiver beneath her as the sudden shadow swept across the adjacent building, the crane swinging unpredictably in the wind, threatening to collide with the rotors. She adjusted cyclic and collective micro-movements, barely perceptible but precise, keeping the helicopter stable, every gust, every vibration registered in her senses, every instinct honed over years of flight guiding her. Hands the rooftop a precarious perch, every second a test of nerves and skill. She shifted slightly forward, inch by inch, the skids scraping lightly against the rooftop metal edge, the engines humming under strain, the rotors slicing through turbulent air debris flying past in chaotic arcs, Maria's eyes scanning constantly every antenna vent and edge, the city wind twisting between buildings, a relentless adversary. She micro-adjusted tail rotor, cyclic, and pedals, maintaining perfect balance. Hovering above the hatch, the crowd below holding their breath, unable to comprehend the skill required to hold the helicopter steady in such conditions. The crane swung closer, a sudden gust catching it, sending cables rattling toward the rotor wash. Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose back, adjusting collective cyclic and pedals, the Black Hawk twisting slightly in mid-air, avoiding collision by inches, the skids remaining perfectly over the rooftop, the vibrations through the controls, a warning she interpreted instantly, making another adjustment, the helicopter responding exactly as she commanded. Her pulse steady, her focus absolute. She began to taxi the Blackhawk toward the other side of the rooftop, the wind funneling between. The tall buildings creating erratic currents, she leaned into the controls, adjusting cyclic and pedals, the rotors slicing air that moved like liquid, the engines humming in perfect harmony under strain. She moved slowly, inch by inch, the skids barely, clearing rooftop obstacles, vents, small HVAC units and antennas, each adjustment, a delicate dance, every micro-movement, critical the margin for error, microscopic. A sudden gust slammed against the helicopter from the side, the tail rotor tilting dangerously. Maria countered immediately with pedal and cyclic adjustments, the Blackhawk responding instantly. The skids scraping slightly over the roof edge, but holding the aircraft perfectly stable, her eyes scanning the surrounding buildings for shadows, or debris that could threaten the rotor wash. Every sense alert, every muscle coiled, ready to react, the crowd below frozen in disbelief and awe at the precision required. She began the approach toward the emergency hatch, the extraction point carefully, calculating every inch, the skids nearing the metal frame, the wind shifting again, forcing constant micro-adjustments, cyclic, collective, and pedals moving in perfect synchronization, the rotors slicing the air, the tail rotor compensating for gusts. She hovered over the hatch perfectly aligned, ready for the final step. The helicopter trembling under strain, every gust a test of nerves. Suddenly, a loose cable from the crane above whipped toward the rotor blades. Maria reacted instantly, tilting, the nose forward adjusting pedals and cyclic. The Blackhawk twisting slightly to the side, the skids rocking but holding the hatch perfectly aligned, debris bouncing harmlessly away. She exhaled slightly, but did not relax every micro-adjustment. Still critical, the rooftop edge, a constant threat. Every gust of wind, a reminder of the fragility of her perch. The engines hummed under strain, the rotors vibrating violently, the city wind unpredictable as she began the final hover, Maria's hands. Steady on the controls, micro-adjustments keeping the helicopter balanced every second, stretching longer than a minute. The skids inches from the hatch ready to touch down but still vulnerable, the tail rotor compensating for sudden gusts. The Blackhawk responding perfectly, the margin for error non-existent. She inched the Blackhawk forward toward the hatch each centimeter, a victory against gravity and wind. The engines roaring, the rotors slicing the air, the rooftop trembling slightly beneath. The rotor wash debris flying past every gust, a test Maria, adjusting cyclic and collective instantaneously, her focus absolute, every muscle, taut, every sense heightened, the hatch coming closer. The skids aligning perfectly, but still vulnerable too. Any sudden shift in wind, a sudden vortex, funneled between two tall buildings, sending papers, trash, and debris into the rotor wash. The Blackhawk jolting, Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose adjustee. The sun glinted off the rotors of the Blackhawk as Captain Maria Reynolds stood beside it, her flight suit tight against the wind, the helicopter humming like a living creature beneath her feet. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, the engineers, the instructors, the other pilots all shaking their heads and whispering, "Impossible, you cannot land this here. Not on that rooftop, not on a building that narrow and fragile." Maria smiled faintly, her hands resting on the sides of the aircraft. She knew the physics. She knew the limits of the rotorcraft she had flown thousands of hours, but this was different. This was precision. This was courage against doubt. She could hear the laughter even now, the incredulous chuckles of the men around, her telling her no one could do it. She could hear the doubt echoing in the hangar louder than any engine roar. She knew it was a challenge not to be denied. The briefing room had been tense, charts and blueprints spread across the table showing the rooftop dimensions, the wind calculations, the height, the surrounding buildings, the potential hazards, every variable meticulously planned. Yet every person in the room doubted that it could be done. Maria traced her finger along the diagrams, her eyes steady, her mind focused. She had a plan. She trusted her instincts, and she trusted the machine beneath her. The instructors had tried to dissuade her, offering scenarios of failure, of rotors, striking ledges, of catastrophic loss of control. Maria listened patiently, nodded, and said only, "I can do it." The room erupted in laughter again. One of the senior pilots shaking his head, saying, "No way, that is not possible." Maria said nothing. She simply stepped into the cockpit, her boots clicking against the metal ladder, her heart steady as she lowered herself into the seat, the hum of the helicopter vibrating through her body. She ran the pre-flight checks systematically, her hands moving over the controls with practiced precision. The Black Hawk, a beast of metal and power responding to her touch, she could feel the anticipation building, the rotor spinning faster, her pulse syncing with the whirring of the blades. She adjusted her helmet and visor, her eyes scanning the rooftop from the air. As she lifted off the tarmac, the city sprawling below a patchwork of concrete, steel, and glass. The ascent was smooth, the wind tugging at the helicopter, but Maria adjusted constantly, keeping the aircraft level, keeping the rotors steady. The rooftop came into view, a small square of steel and concrete, barely enough for a medium helicopter. She could feel the challenge in every gust of wind, in every shift of air. She descended slowly, calculating every inch, knowing that hesitation or misjudgment would be catastrophic. From the ground, the laughter had faded into silence, disbelief and awe, replacing mockery as they watched her maneuver the massive helicopter closer to the building, the city noise muffled by the roar of the rotors. The sheer scale of the landing site overwhelming for anyone else, but Maria's mind was clear. Every movement calculated, every adjustment deliberate. She tilted the rotor slightly, countering the wind. She felt the lift balancing with the weight pressing down. The rooftop edge rose rapidly beneath her, the concrete so close she could see the cracks in the surface, the vents, the small obstacles she had memorized from the plans and photographs. The Black Hawk responded perfectly under her hands. It hovered just above the roof, the rotor wash sending debris flying from the edges. She adjusted her position, inches mattering more than yards. The other pilots, holding their breath, watching impossibly as she made it look effortless. She began the descent slowly, the landing skids approaching the surface. She felt every vibration, every shift in weight. The rooftop not perfectly level, the wind gusting. Unpredictably, she made micro-adjustments, small movements that defied imagination. The building swaying slightly. Under the weight, the surrounding air currents pushing against her, and she held firm. She could hear the silence from below, the disbelief growing palpable. Just as the skids were inches from the surface, the helicopter rocked slightly, a gust catching it from the side. She reacted instantly, tilting the rotors, adjusting throttle and pitch, the aircraft responding exactly as she commanded. The rooftop edge looming dangerously close, the wind pushing against the sides, the challenge at its peak, every second stretching longer than a minute, every movement crucial. And then, just as the rotors threatened to catch the edge, she stabilized the Black Hawk and brought it down onto the rooftop, perfectly centered, the skid touching the concrete lightly. The helicopter settling into place, a marvel of control and skill, a testament to human precision and courage. From below, the crowd erupted not with laughter, but with astonished cheers and gasps. They could not believe what they had just witnessed, some shaking their heads, unable to comprehend how anyone could have accomplished such a feat. The laughter replaced by silence, broken only by the sound of the rotors and the pounding of adrenaline in every chest. But Maria did not exhale yet, her hands still steady on the controls, her eyes scanning the rooftop, the surrounding buildings, knowing that landing was only half the challenge. The rooftop was not a permanent perch. She would have to taxi, carefully shift weight, and prepare to take off again. The mission was not complete, and the wind was still unpredictable and dangerous. And as she sat there hovering slightly above the rooftop, waiting for the final adjustments, a sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon of buildings, sending debris spiraling and the Black Hawk swaying perilously, leaving everyone watching below, frozen with fear and anticipation. The Black Hawk trembled slightly as Captain Maria Reynolds adjusted the collective, her eyes scanning the rooftop, every detail. Memorized the vents, the HVAC units, the antennas, the small obstacles that could spell disaster with a single miscalculation. Her hands moved over the controls with precision instinct and experience, guiding every motion, the city wind swirling unpredictably. Between buildings, tugging at the helicopter as though testing her resolve. She shifted slightly to counter a sudden gust, the skid scraping lightly against the rooftop surface. She felt the vibration through her legs, through the controls. Through her entire body, every sense heightened, the hum of the rotors filling her ears, but her mind silent, except for the focus on control, the balance, the minute adjustments that would keep the aircraft steady, the SEALs and instructors below frozen in, all watching the impossible being executed before their eyes. Maria began to taxi the Black Hawk forward, inch by inch, the rooftop narrower than any landing zone she had ever encountered, every movement deliberate micro-adjustments keeping the rotor. Wash from sending antennas or debris tumbling, she tilted slightly forward, then back the tail rotor countering gusts, the skids barely clearing a vent, and she felt the tension rise, the helicopter reacting perfectly, but the margin for error microscopic. Wind shifted again, a sudden vortex forming between two taller buildings, sending a shock through the helicopter. She countered instantly, adjusting cyclic and collective, the Black Hawk leaning slightly to the left, the rotors whirring in perfect harmony with her commands, the crowd below, unable to comprehend the skill required to maintain stability on a rooftop. This small and exposed the city noises, distant behind the roar of the engines. The tension in the air palpable. She moved closer, to the center of the rooftop, her hands never leaving the controls, the skids aligning perfectly with the marked landing zone. She glanced over the instruments confirming fuel pressure, rotor speed, engine performance, everything within normal parameters. Despite the strain, she could feel the vibrations through the airframe, every gust of wind sending subtle signals through the controls requiring instantaneous reaction, her muscles coiled ready for every adjustment. Suddenly, a loose piece of metal from a rooftop unit flew up into the rotor wash. It spun toward the tail rotor. Maria reacted instantly, tilting the nose slightly back, applying counter-torque, adjusting cyclic and collective, the Black Hawk twisting in the air without losing position, the debris bouncing off harmlessly, but leaving a surge of adrenaline coursing through her body. The instructors and engineers below letting out collective gasps at the impossible precision. The helicopter swayed slightly from another gust. A sudden rush of wind funneled through a narrow alley, sending papers and trash into the rotor wash. She adjusted the tail rotor trim, the cyclic, the pedals micro-adjustments that kept the aircraft from tilting dangerously. The rooftop narrow every second, an unforgiving test of skill. Her pulse, steady, her focus, absolute. The city below, a maze of concrete, glass, and steel that seemed intent on throwing her off course. Maria moved the helicopter toward a small opening near the edge of the rooftop, the extraction point for cargo and personnel, a maneuver requiring precise alignment with barely inches to spare. The wind swirling violently through the space between buildings, threatening to catch the tail rotor. She leaned into the controls, every instinct guiding her, the Black Hawk responding perfectly, every tilt, every adjustment bringing her closer to the critical point where hesitation could mean disaster. The engines hummed under strain, the rotors slicing the air, creating turbulence that swirled around antennas and rooftop equipment, the Black Hawk hovering impossibly steady. She began lowering the skids carefully, the rooftop edge approaching rapidly, her hands steady, her mind calculating every second. The gusts unpredictable, the instruments flickering with minor warnings, but Maria ignoring them, trusting her senses, her experience, and the feel of the aircraft beneath her. A sudden scream echoed from the ground below a cons.